All right, so today we're going to talk about formatting your screenplay. This is more of a technical lesson for the first part of it, at least for the first part of the PowerPoint. So I don't really want to get too much into me over explaining things. Everything is pretty much laid out for what you need to know in the first couple slides as far as like margins, font, stuff like that goes. So look there. I will say at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking about different programs that I recommend you using to write your screenplay. And if you get one of those, typically you're not going to have to worry too much about the format because it will do it for you. I do want you to know these things. There may be a question or two on the test about them, but that's really about it. I think we've talked about the slug line a little bit. This is going to be something you need for every single scene. We talked about it when we were talking about the 40 card layout, where you've got the interior, the exterior, talking about where the scene is taking place and all that. You've got that on your 40 card layout, but you've also going to have that in your screen. You're also going to have that in your screenplay. And then from there, you're going to have your action scenes. You're going to have your description lines. Those are laid out for you in the PowerPoint. Character description, I'm not going to get into too much into that. Just look at the PowerPoint. You'll be able to see all that. But I really did want to focus on dialogue for a little bit. Not necessarily the format of it, because I think you can see that pretty well on the slide where it talks about dialogue. I've got the little section from Shawshank Redemption on there. And I've given some parameters. That's one of them that you're really going to be wanting to pay attention to, especially if you're just going to try to do this on Word or whatever. The justification is very different than just a typical set up on Word or Pages or whatever. So I think Google Docs does this. I know all the other programs that I'm going to mention do dialogue correctly, but you just need to make sure that the margins are correct for that. But really what I want to focus on as far as dialogue goes is sort of how to write good dialogue, not how it looks on the page, but how to make it compelling. Because really, you've got your scene descriptions, you've got your action cues, all of those things. But the dialogue is what your audience is going to hear. They're not necessarily going to see how you've written the scene descriptions and the action cues. They'll see that on screen, but they will actually hear the dialogue. So I've given you plenty of examples of bad dialogue and some things that you want to avoid as far as that goes. And then I've tried to give you some examples of good dialogue. So, of course, you're going to want to try to avoid cliches as much as possible. Obviously, people talk in cliches. That's why they're cliche. So if you're trying to give an accurate portrayal of how people talk, you will probably get into some cliches. But really, if you want compelling dialogue, you're not going to want to use too many cliches. Make sure if you're going to use cliches, metaphors, similes, whatever, that they make sense. And please, please, please try not to use too much forced exposition. That is the last thing. We've talked about showing and not telling. If you've been in any of my writing classes, you've seen that. And so that's another thing that you can really get in trouble with in dialogue, is just over explaining everything to your audience. Your audience is going to be smarter than you give them credit for. So just go ahead, include all the necessary exposition you need to in dialogue, but leave it up to the audience. Trust your audience that, through all the images, through the scenes, the action, the conflict, that they're going to pick up on certain things. You also don't want to just keep repeating what the other person is saying if you've got like a question and answer thing. That's a good way to do dialogue back and forth between people, this question and answer thing. But if one person is just repeating what the other one has been saying in their questions, then that's going to get old really fast. Another thing you want to be aware of, this is the last thing we'll talk about before we get into good dialogue, is just avoiding meaningless exposition. So that's bad dialogue. Let's focus on some good dialogue now. You know, we can talk about all the things that you do wrong, but until you talk about things that you do correctly, you know, you're not really going to. So as you can see, if you just continue to look through some of the examples I put on the PowerPoint there, especially from Social Network, you'll see a good back and forth as far as questioning goes there. Sorkin's a master of that. And then you'll see different things as far as, like from Batman, with monologues that I want you to focus on, and just some different things that discuss how to take the mistakes that people make in bad dialogue and turn them into good pieces of dialogue. So we're going to focus a little bit more on that in this week's discussion post. So I want you to be thinking about some examples of either good or bad dialogue that you know from movies, and really what rules they break if they're bad dialogue, or what they do really, really well in developing the scene, setting the conflict, etc., if they are good dialogue. And so, you know, that's you know how you write good dialogue. Also, there's you know, every scene needs to have conflict. We talked about how every scene is going to be like a mini movie, and that's what your discussion. That's what your discussion post was on. How, you know, there needs to be conflict in every single scene. Well, that also pertains to dialogue. You need to make sure that every scene, especially with dialogue in it, is really having as much conflict as possible.
Okay, real quickly, before she finds me again, I just need to tell you about some different programs that you can use to write your screenplay. I think, in my opinion, the easiest and the cheapest to use is Google Docs. So they've got some different format templates there if you can figure out how to use that. As far as free applications go, I would recommend Celtics. You can see all these on the last slide of my PowerPoint. It's free, and it's got a lot of different templates and things that you can use for that. I think it's a little bit more consistent than Google Docs. If you want to pay for something, you think you're going to use this in the future, I definitely recommend Scrivener. It's about $50, and for that price, it's the best you can get. And then, I mean, if you want to use what I use, and you know what the pros use, and you want to shell out like 130 something bucks, I recommend using Final Draft. It's really the best one they have out there. So